Here now is Paul Rieckhoff, who's the founder of American Veterans for Ukraine, host of the Independent Americans podcast. Hello, my friend. How significant is this? You know, I'm sure Putin's not happy. He's probably embarrassed. How significant do you think it is, though, to have Ukrainian troops inside Russia?
Very significant, Connell. I think it's much more than a dilemma. This is what it looks like when the Ukrainians have the handcuffs off, when they can actually go on the offensive, when they have adequate financial and military support, when they have F-16s, when they have ATACMS and other long-range weapons. This is what it looks like when it's a fair fight, when the Ukrainians can actually push back and try to hit Russians before they get hit. And I think we have to always put ourselves in their shoes. How would we feel if our women and children and cities were being bombed? We wouldn't stop at the border if that was happening to us. And I think it's been amazing that the Ukrainians have held back this much so far. So they're not going to stop until they get what they want, which is Russia to leave Ukraine. If Putin wants to stop this advance from Ukraine, it's pretty simple. Get out of Ukraine. Once he does that, then Ukraine has a victory and this ends.
See the video there. I want to make a point on the maps about it. What you just said, Russia's advance into Ukraine, because the Russian troops control a number of areas in the eastern part of Ukraine. We bring up the maps here and we could show them. There it is in red, right? So that's all what we would have considered before this Ukrainian sovereign territory, but it's Russian-controlled territory, and how they've advanced into Ukraine, okay? Now, the second map, I want to show where in Russia we're talking about here, because now the Ukrainian troops have come, you know, across the border, and moved into this area. That's Kursk, right there. That's Russia. So, as I said, their plan is to keep going. But then what? Remember, Putin the other day said this is all a negotiating ploy. You think it's much more, it sounds like.
I think this is war. I mean, this is open war with changing borders and with people now able to fight on both sides of borders that continue to change. Again, I go back to putting ourselves in their shoes. Imagine if somebody told us after 9/11 we couldn't hit in Afghanistan, that we couldn't go after bin Laden, after our women and children and civilians and cities had been attacked. It would be unreasonable. So I think the Ukrainians have really been held to an unreasonable, unprecedented standard. And now that they finally have the opportunity to change the tempo, to gain momentum, they are on the offense. And this has been some of the best news we've seen from Ukrainian forces since the start of the war.
There's Russian troops surrendering the other day. There they are on the side of the road. That was something else, some dramatic videos, see them lying down there. But it's going to be really interesting because we haven't seen much movement on the front lines of this war at all, right, for a long time. But now we see this. I want to shift gears. Let me get your thoughts on the campaign a little bit, because one of the topics you and I have talked about has come up again. We're waiting for Trump next hour, as you see at the bottom of your screen, to make this speech on the economy. But Tim Walz was running as the running mate of Kamala Harris, has been under scrutiny, and his military record has been questioned, particularly by J.D. Vance, who also served in the military. Vance had an event last hour. He didn't bring it up today, but he has many times. And Walz defended himself on the trail yesterday, saying this. Listen.
I serve for the next 24 years for the same reason all my brothers and sisters in uniform do. We love this country. Then in 2005, I felt the call of duty again, this time of being service to my country in the halls of Congress. My students inspired me to run for that office, and I was proud to make it to Washington. I was a member of the Veterans Affairs Committee and a champion of our men and women in uniform.
So there have been a couple of different questions brought up about Walz, about whether he kind of bailed out on his colleagues, so to speak, and didn't serve, because he knew there was a deployment coming up. That was one. And then there have been some questions about whether he's been telling the truth about his rank and things like that. I know you know Tim Walz. What do you make of all this?
Well, I think, first of all, I think that everybody's service that's honorable should be off limits here politically. And I'm always sad as a veteran to see other veterans attacking each other or fighting over their service. They're both honorable men. They both did their service, and they did it in different ways. But this is kind of the worst of politics. And J.D. Vance fired the first shot. And what he did was attack Walz's service and say that he left out on his unit before they deployed. And that's not true. Walz had been retired or put in his retirement papers 2 years prior to them deploying. And now Walz is trying to set the record straight. The campaign's got to put out information and put out validators. And I think there's something to note here, too. Walz has kind of taken the high road here. He's defending himself, and he's saying, you know, I'm going to honor Vance's service, and I hope he'll honor mine. We'll see what happens next. They can bring the temperature down, or they can continue to have this war between the political warriors unfold, which frankly I think pulls us all down and takes us away from policy. But I don't think this is going to be the last we see of this kind of a fight, especially between Wallace and Vance, who are the first post 9/11 service members we've seen run on a major ticket since 9/11. They won't be the last. They're running as VP, but I look forward to a day when we see one or both or no parties running all candidates that have served in uniform at some time since 9/11. There's an incredible generation of these leaders, and this is just the start.
Right. I know you're one of them. And, maybe we're moving on from this a little. Again, Vance didn't mention it, we don't think, last hour. But good to see you, Paul. We'll talk to you again next week. Paul Rieckhoff. By the way, Paul, if you want more on this issue, Paul gets into it on the podcast, the Independent Americans podcast. It said, there you see the Tim Walz I know. He's worked with Governor Walz for a number of years on veterans issues. So listen in wherever you get your podcast. Now,